Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I'm Theo Black,
And I'm Sarah Black.
and I am mightily distracted today, and this is later than usual, but we're going to do this anyways. We're
You're
going to do it.
distracted because you have a new family member in your house, which makes it sound like your girlfriend gave birth, but actually you got a cat.
Yes, because that does make it sound like that, but that's not what happened. We have a cat now. The cat is appropriately, as they often do when first introduced to a new household, hiding. Although
Yeah.
the cat is hiding in plain sight in the bathtub, which is kind of adorable. But that's fine. We petted it a little bit. It's not hissing. We're keeping our distance. Space.
My cats are kind of Chip kind of likes the bathtub. They're I don't know. Well, Chip's gotten in it. Cats in bathtubs are an odd
Yeah. Well,
pairing.
was it Annie who used to like go in and drink water
Oh,
from?
like she liked the human flavored bath water a lot. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Annie was very odd, but I liked Annie. Annie
all,
was,
all cats have their idiosyncrasies.
they
Anyway,
do. Anyways, okay, so minus that diversion, let us start talking about today's bad movie, or our first bad movie.
right.
So we've made our way into. Oh, wait, I did this wrong in the order. We're actually going to talk about Lifeforce first.
Oh, was that the first one? That's right, because we watched them out of
We
order.
watched them out of order, but Lifeforce is from the 80s. So my bad on the
Not
document.
that you'd really know by watching, because
No.
Dead Space has a kind of a timeless quality to it that places it anywhere.
It does, but let's
In
not get
modern
ahead of
filmmaking.
ourselves here.
Okay, so Life Force.
Life
So
Force.
who's describing which movie?
Oh gosh, I go ahead and describe Life Force. You get to do Life Force.
Okay, so in Life Force, a group of British astronauts come across some naked people in space. And they bring the naked people back, and they end up being vampires who escape and basically take over London. I mean, that's kind of it. You're muted or something. I'm not hearing you.
Whoops, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. What did
Whoops,
you do?
I hit the button twice, I think, on accident. Yeah, Life Force is like, well, so I want to lead with the first thought. I think the real concrete thought that you and I had. We both had this thought separately, but I mentioned it to you, which is that we've seen Dawn of the Dead recently, and Life Force is like not only spoilers, by the way,
Oh,
spoilers.
spoilers. We're gonna I already spoiled it, really.
Yeah, you did, but that's okay. Spoilers about this and anything we mention, but it's as if Dawn of the Dead, like Life Force, is what leads into Dawn of the Dead, except that instead of it being energy vampires, it's zombies. But like,
Yeah.
basically, Life Force is a movie that doesn't care about that kind of stuff. It's energy sucking vampires who are also zombies with plague.
Well, and if you remember, in Night of the Living Dead,
That's the
that's
first
the
one.
first one. It was a comet, right? It was a comet that made people that
It
was
was.
making
You're right. I have forgotten about
reanimate.
that.
So, something I actually want to clarify for us is you and I talked about both this and Dead Space as B movies, and this is actually Life Force is not a B movie because it had a $25 million budget. It is a B movie studio attempting to do a blockbuster film by hiring Toby Hooper, who first did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a B movie as far as I'm aware. It's a low budget horror film. But then he did Poltergeist, which was definitely a larger film.
Yeah, I mean, these are not the only movies he did, but famously.
Right. And Dan O'Bannon, I think at that point had done Alien. He wrote on it and stuff like that. So there is A-list talent on this movie being done by Canon Films, which is a definite like low budget B type studio that tried to become prestige and went down in a dumpster fire basically as a result.
Well, I have a weird connection to all of this for two reasons. One, well, no, for one reason, but so the first thing is there's a documentary called Electric Boogaloo, which I think is about a movie called Electric Boogaloo. I mean, it's a documentary about Canon, but there's also a movie called Electric Boogaloo, which is a feature film, fictional. Right. But I'm talking about the documentary, and the documentary is great. And many years ago when we watched the documentary, and I was watching it, and I'm like, these people look familiar. At the time, I was doing an internship at Millennium Entertainment. There's Millennium Films and Entertainment. There's two different companies, and one of them is the one I was in internet, and one of them was something else. Now, the one I was in internet was what Canon essentially became. Right. And I think they like did the Expendables, or I think they produced it. I forget how that all works, but that's who they turned into. So I have a weird like tangential connection.
Right, and they were really good at making a profit off of I mean, it was like Roger Corman, who, you know, if you spend less on a movie, but can, you know, make more money off of people buying and watching it, you know, you're turning a profit. And there are people who do that. And I mean, we talked about this a little, I think, with even Monster at Go-Go. You know, there's different reasons to make movies.
Right.
And it is a business, and it is expensive to make movies versus some art. You know, all art has barriers to entry, including just having leisure time and so on. But,
right,
you know, they were definitely about how they could quickly, inexpensively make movies and make a profit. But then Lifeforce is a different monster because they really put some money into it. Out of curiosity, I looked at Stuart Gordon, and Reanimator had a budget of like $1 to $2 million, and From Beyond had like a $5 million budget. And those, to me, you know, and then after that, there's like micro budget, which is like way
like
smaller.
Cane River.
Right, totally. So, you know, just to kind of comparison it to make a comparison.
Very good.
But Lifeforce, okay, so let's talk about the movie itself for a moment. It is ambitious beyond its ability to kind of deliver the goods, I would say. Because, okay, so bear with me one moment and then I'll let you talk.
All right.
I kept thinking about 2001. But if you think about a movie that doesn't start with the characters you end with, and the last section of 2001, you're kind of with those guys. I mean, I love Keir Dullea, but most people have no idea who he is. And when I'm like, he's Dave, he's the guy that Hal's talking to at the end of 2001, then they know who he is, right?
Yeah.
And Dave, and I forget the other astronaut's name, and I've seen him and stuff, but like they're just guys, right? Like there's not much to them. It's Kubrick. Kubrick doesn't like characters that much, but
basically.
But you know, it has this kind of like you start in one place and you go to another, and then you go to another. Well, with Lifeforce, you know, you start up in space with these astronauts. You kind of follow the trail of bodies down to Earth, where you end up in the institute where it's not an institute,
it's a research center.
Right, where
it's billed as.
Where, you know, and by then you're like an hour in, I think, kind of getting there. And by the time you end up with the two schlubs who you're going to end up with for the rest of the film, you don't even end up with one of them. You end up with one of them. You see him a few times. And I think he's one of the ESA, the European Space Agency guys. And then you meet up with one of the astronauts from the Churchill, and they end up being kind of your end game people. And that's not typical. Like that is going, and I was reading on Wikipedia some about how there was a ton of footage shot of things that didn't make it in. You know,
that's not surprising.
And it was mostly like stuff up in space with the astronauts and so on, which speaks again to kind of the ambition of the project versus what actually happened. And you and I were even talking about All the President's Men, which is also a movie that here we are comparing Lifeforce to 2001 and All the President's Men. But it you know, it just stars it stars Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, but the characters are just kind of two reporters. You don't get much insight into their lives or anything.
I mean, one of them's the workhorse, and one of them's the guy with the connections, and that's not like, that's like a bit of character, but that's like kind of the extent of how deep it goes, really.
Right, and I think, you know, part of it is having Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford. No shade on the guys in Lifeforce, they're fine, but they're not as iconic looking.
Yeah.
And the dialogue is just, you know, the mannerisms and so on gives you a lot to go off of, even though you don't know where their backstories very much.
Yeah.
And so by the end, you're kind of watching two dudes run around, you know, a British dude and an American dude, like trying to find the vampire, and it's just like it's like visually interesting, and it's interesting to talk about, but in the moment it was kind of like, here's the guy, but again, the ambition wise compared to what we've seen, like Monster a Go-Go,
Jeez.
the Giant Claw, like London is burning, you've got miniatures on fire, you've got all these extras running around, like, I mean, it's got money on screen that you can see, and the visual effects are a little funky, but they're kind of fun. I thought they were. I mean, they're not like Giant Claw or whatever, where you saw a hand in
Yeah.
like holding something on screen. Like they're and I think the visual effects person on Lifeforce is a name. It's Dykstra, right?
Right. It's Dykstra, and I forget exactly who he is, but he's a name. Well, everybody's a name, but he's a more famous name for having done certain things.
Right. So it's just an interesting. Oh wow, Poltergeist had a $10 million budget. So now someone did remind me that the budgets for Canon are loosey-goosey, and who knows, like Wikipedia is saying 25 million, but who knows what the actual budget was, how it, because they all of Hollywood likes to cook the books a little bit, so who knows for sure. But anyway, so that's kind of, I find it I'm not sure how entertaining I find it. I definitely find it really interesting. And our lead vampire is a lady who's nude most of the time. I do like a movie where the monster is a naked girl.
Well, okay, so I do too. Naked women, perfectly fine with them. Naked men too, but naked men, you can't show penises without getting in trouble with the MPAA because nudity restrictions are weird. Anyways, okay, so we discussed this a little bit already, but Lifeforce almost doesn't fit into our bad good movie month,
right?
Because it is a space movie with monsters, space monsters. It actually takes place somewhat in outer space, and Robot Monster didn't, Giant Claw didn't, Monster a Go-Go starts. There's two shots where something is in outer space, but otherwise no. And The Incredible Melting Man has a full sequence in space.
Right. We're slowly working our way into space.
Right, which is just how things are going, I guess.
Actually, it is, because by the time we get to Dead Space, we're like fully in space. Although I think our next two films aren't as in space again, but
I don't know much at all about AVP, or what was our other one? I don't even remember. But yeah, they're not as much. So it almost doesn't fit into being a bad good movie, because it's kind of an entertaining B movie with a movie money, maybe. And yeah, Canon. Here's the thing. So I was looking at something the other day, because me and Jill are going through Stargate SG-1. I've talked about it, and in the Stargate mythos, not necessarily SG-1, no spoilers for that in particular, but like I was looking up like this character coming or going, or like why this happened or that happened. And like, there's a few places where it's like, well, the producers wanted to do this, or the producers wanted to do that. And that happens in anything, in any movie, anywhere. There's this whole idea that if you give creatives complete control over their films, suddenly they'll be amazing. That is bullshit.
It's been proven to be the opposite sometimes. But...
yeah, like anything, it is all specific on the people involved, the creative, the higher ups, all of that. Sometimes you need a certain kind of producer to make certain kinds of movies, whatever. But when a producer says like, oh, you should kill this character off in your TV show, it's really just because they're trying to drum up ratings. Now, in a movie setting, Canon strikes me as the kind of group, from watching that documentary and from having seen a few films, like they did the Death Wish movies. They did this Electric Boogaloo that I don't really know that well. I've seen a few of their movies show up on
Chuck Norris stuff. I think they did a lot of that.
Right, and I've seen their stuff fly by on Best of the Worst with Red Letter Media, and like for me, for them, it feels like it's not Roger Corman where it's like one for you, one for me, where like he kind of does stuff and then he lets other people do stuff, and it's kind of like this training ground, but also this place where you get to be kind of experimental and all that. This is more like the people at Canon, and probably the two heads, were like, just do shit, make big noises, whatever you want, just make it big. Like they were it is almost more.
I mean, they did the Franco Zeffirelli Othello, on the other hand. Like, they were an odd group.
Right. Well, and we've seen The Apple, which
Yes.
is
Right.
which is one of our favorite bad good movies. Billy,
Like,
I am.
Speed. So
Yes. Well,
well, because
I'm getting to. I have
okay,
one.
sorry,
I'll finish my
sorry.
thought. So, Canon is like, they just do wacky shit. Like, the producers there aren't like, oh, kill this guy off because it'll improve their ratings. These guys are like, just do this and then do that and then do this thing and then here. So that means that like their bad movies are entertaining because they're just full of random shit, full of random stuff happening. And a movie like Lifeforce, which is essentially a B movie with A movie money, is more entertaining because you've got Patrick Stewart dissolving into blood and turning into another person. You've got London exploding. You've got like people running around trying to solve something, and then they come outside and hey, the apocalypse is hit. Like, it's got stuff like that, which is kind of great.
Masochist woman. You've got all kind of like
and like just plus you've
yeah.
got floating umbrella sperm spaceship bullshit thing happening, which is like, I don't know what that is, but it's a great design. And space vampires. It is literally space vampires. So it's like this movie is ultimately, I think, fits into our bad good month. But I also could see people like you and me being like, it's kind of just entertaining.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a like there's too much talking in stretches where nothing matters. But
Right.
and there's no character to speak of. But like, it's just entertaining because weird, crazy shit is happening.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not it doesn't like it doesn't fail at things the way like it fails at things for sure, but not like, you know, Robot Monster or
like just everything.
Yeah, it does, and it doesn't have the nonsensicalness of Robot Monster, and it doesn't
Right.
have the kind of humor of Melting Man, which I think are kind of the two we've enjoyed the most so far.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of like the smallness of Melting Man, for example, where you end with the guy melting, being stuck. You know, there's something about that so that it's a little overwhelming when you get to something like Lifeforce, which suddenly London's on fire. But at the same time, there is also something fascinating. Like, we've watched the Romero films, and Romero couldn't do those kind of scenes that way. I don't think he ever had that budget. So
yeah, even in his later movies.
Yeah, and it doesn't, you don't see the seams, you don't quite see, it's just, you know, sometimes what we like about B movies is that you explore topics that you can't when you're trying to get money from everyone. If you need a huge broad audience, then your movie needs to be broad enough that you're gonna attract as many people as possible and alienate the least.
Right.
And if you've made a lower budget film, you can go after a more niche audience where it's like, we just want to find the guys that like slasher films. We just want to find the people that like things free on a spaceship.
Yeah.
You know, kind of a thing. And Lifeforce almost is kind of in between where I mean, I can't think of another high budget film that has a naked lady wandering around quite the way Lifeforce does. And that feels very, I mean, it was making me think of Zardoz a little bit.
There's a scene.
There's a budget for Zardoz. I feel like things got really weird in the 70s and 80s. Budget for Zardoz was 1.5 million. So that's tiny compared
we
to
hadn't
Lifeforce.
quite entered the superhero era, which is, I guess, the 2000s roughly. And I mean, this is even before MCU. There were other superhero movies and tentpole movies, but like, I feel like the 90s is where things shifted from sort of like from late 60s to early 90s. You've got different things happening, and probably the 70s are the most interesting so far to me. Not that I'm a film historian, but once you get to the 90s, you start getting more tentpole movies and they start doing it different. But anyways,
90s and beyond was also kind of the beginning of the era of home entertainment and direct to DVD and all that. And I do not know much about that except that it was a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
it has these kind of salacious B movie bits in a high budget film, and that just makes it kind of interesting. I mean,
well, it's also the first one we've watched. Like, The Incredible Melting Man has, I think there's like one or two. No, I don't think there's any. I think there's still no special effects. Like non-practical special effects in The Incredible Melting Man, at least none of the obvious stuff. Like there's still, I'm sure they're doing some kind of color correction and treatment to the film and all that, but we haven't entered computers yet. Whereas I think Lifeforce is, what year is Lifeforce?
85.
85. So I think like the whole, like they're doing, so I guess we're still not, I'm not sure if these count as computer, but we've now reached like post Star Wars. Like that's kind of important.
Yeah.
You know, this is post Star Wars. I think Incredible Melting Man might have been the same year as the original Star Wars, but I forget what year that was. But we're post Empire Strikes Back, post Return of the Jedi. So we've got like compositing and layering, and there's and your boyfriend explained all of how they did the blue electricity effect, which was kind of neat. And we've also got like it's really the layering of shots that's kind of interesting to me, and it looks a lot better than it's not. There's less green screen, I guess, is what would have been done before that, or where they're projecting on a background or something. I don't know, but there's something about the way Lifeforce works. Maybe somebody who really knows special effects can say definitively what it is. But we've reached an era where it looks a certain way, and I mean, Dead Space doesn't have any of this because it's a terrible movie with no money. But in the 90s, you start to get computer effects in movies. Right. So if we had just picked a different one, we would have seen that. But like we're entering a different era of effects. Yeah. And this is that double-edged sword where it's like, I'm not somebody who bemoans every big movie that has practical effects. The effects in Lifeforce are a part of what make it fun. It's so neat. Right. You know, all the designs are really clever.
You're not someone who bemoans computer effects.
And computer effects. Yeah, and so like in Lifeforce, they look really neat, and even in the Marvel movies, I enjoy a lot of the design. And like that Warhammer or Warcraft movie that I saw, it was Warcraft. Like that movie was pretty boring, except that the effects were really neat. But it's also that thing where you move away from practical effects, and I think a part of what you and I like about like indie horror movies or movies from the 70s and the 80s and the 60s is there's a lot of practical effects. Yeah, and like The Incredible Melting Man is just this like goopy, messy stuff. It's just really fun to look at. It has a reality, it has a feel and a touch to it and a texture that a lot of computer effects didn't really have until the last decade. And even then it's really a matter of like which studio has more money. Now these effects get better and better, and maybe in 20 years none of this will matter, but like there's a weird, this is a movie where like I really like the effects and they managed to have some texture, and we're going to get away from that, I think, as movies go forward a little bit. Not that we're going to watch those, but just like there's an interesting sort of thing there.
Right. And a lot of it depended on the director and if they knew what they were doing and what could be done and so on. Like Jurassic Park, you know, they were very modest with how they used it, and it worked to great effect. Whereas if you start thinking you can do everything with computer, you know.
Well, right. What year? Because Jaws is 75, right?
Something
here, I'll look this up. Don't worry about it.
Jaws is 75.
And then I think E.T. is a little later than Jaws, right?
I think E.T. is 82, yeah.
Yeah, so like, it's interesting to sort of think about these movies in the years they come out and what it shows about the change of, because you and I talk about, you know, art and how people are like, oh, they just suddenly started doing this, you know, people who don't really think too hard about it. And it's like, no, well, now they have nuts and bolts that are built so that you can take your painting.
Right. I mean, it's like people get really, I mean, we talk about this in art, like, why didn't Michelangelo just go out and paint landscapes? Well, because you really couldn't, like, you just didn't have the materials. You didn't have the way to do it. So, you know, art is affected by what's going on. It was interesting. So John Dykstra is the special effects artist, and his Wikipedia even says pioneer in the development of the use of computers in filmmaking. Yeah. So yeah, it was. I mean, we haven't talked about the plot a ton, except to say, like, in some ways, it's just a monster movie, but the monster has to be a naked woman. One thing I wanted to mention too is that I had seen in Wikipedia and kind of noticed as we were watching that Tobe Hooper, who's the director, was influenced by Hammer films, right? Which you have been watching, and there's definitely a gothic feel to some of the scenes, especially towards the end, I'd say, when you're like in a crypt, you know, with a vampire kind of a thing. It made me think of the Vampire Lovers. Yeah, there's a vampire, because we did this, and Let's Scare Jessica to Death had a vampire-ish quality to it. So
yeah, it was unintentional.
It's a lot of vampires going on around here.
Yeah, well, a part of Hammer films is its gothicness, but it's also campy, which
Mm-hmm.
is hit or miss for you. I seem to be the one who likes campy more, which I don't know why that works, but like, so there is a campy element to Life Force, but because there's so much more money to it, the camp doesn't really come through the way it does in like a low budget movie.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about the plot a lot because the plot is like, you know, alien comes from space, is looking for energy. We have to stop it. The end.
Yeah.
Like there's things that happen on the way. Like we run into Patrick Stewart. There's
Blood turns into the shape of that was very cool.
yeah,
Blood turns
there's
into the shape of the naked vampire lady.
people start sweating. There's a couple male vampires. There's some really neat dehydrated corpse effects that also
Right, those were very cool.
In a few instances that results in people like exploding into dust, which is really cool.
I like our American astronaut having this weird connection with the vampire lady.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of suffers from him just being American astronaut man and not having much else going on. But
yeah.
it kind of I mean, it gave it that weird flavor that we're talking about that feels way more B movie than
like this would be a better B movie or a better movie in general if that character had literally any backstory. Like I don't remember a single line of dialogue that explained anything about who he was prior to us meeting him, other than American astronaut on.
But again, I also think if the writing of the script itself had been better,
right,
there would have been more character about him revealed. Instead, he just seemed kind of upset. He seemed upset. Most of the movie, he just seemed kind of upset. And I don't think it's necessarily, I hesitate to blame actors because sometimes there's just not much to work with.
Well, there's not much to work with the script or the director is asking for a certain something.
I can't remember any lines of dialogue from this movie because they just weren't that.
No, it's not that kind of movie.
They were just kind of perfunctory.
It's weirdly to me, you were talking about this, so I'm jumping on something you said when we were discussing it earlier, which is that it almost seems like pre-Emmerich, like it's a pre-Roland Emmerich film. And lately, he's been doing different things, but I'm a fan of Stargate, surprise. And we just watched Independence Day the other day, me and my girlfriend, and like his movies don't have a ton of character, but what he does is he sets up character, makes things happen to those characters. You get one or two more beats of character and a lot of them interacting with stuff. So it's character through action. And that's kind of what he did in those two movies.
But he also, he kind of sets up character and doesn't do anything with it. It's the frustrating thing with Roland Emmerich. It's like, he has a character arc where you have a start and then it gets to the top of the arc and then it just stops. They don't, they don't resolve.
His character arcs fizzle out.
Yeah, they don't really.
And in Life Force, because it's such a B movie, like weirdly, I hadn't even thought about the character arcs until now, because for one thing, we start and end with different characters, which is a bad movie thing to do. But like, there isn't really character
arcs. Or 2001, you could do 2001 or.
Yeah, right. So like there's not real, like, what are the character arcs in Life Force? Nothing, right? Like, but it doesn't really matter because another part of Life Force is you remember the first 10 to 15 minutes of the movie set it up. And so again, we haven't talked a lot about story or character because there isn't much, but in the first 10 to 15 minutes, we are on the Churchill and they're going to the comet and they're in this alien ship. And we're like, oh, this is just going to be literally batshit crazy because vampire bats.
Right. Because they find vampire bats in space. Yes.
Yeah. So it's just that thing where you kind of shrug and you're like, I know what I'm in here for. And you stop expecting a certain level of character or character arc or any of that. So it kind of gets away with not, like, with just
I think of Reanimator, and so much of that is made by Jeffrey Combs' performance, and I don't think you really have a ton of. I think it's just his performance that kind of but then there's that has a famous line to it, and I'm not going to quote it properly, but it's dead cat in the fridge will explain later or whatever. I'm not quoting it quite right, but right. That's a famous line, from Reanimator. What's the famous line from Life Force? I
don't know. Well, and so that's the thing where you're not as plot driven as me, so you have trouble with this in general. There's no plot to Life Force. but there are moments and scenes, and like that's what, like, you can tell who a director is sometimes by how they interact with things. And I don't know Toby Hooper at all. I've never seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I know I need to stop telling me the world, the universe.
Poltergeist, have you
Or
seen
Poltergeist? I haven't seen that either. I think this might be the only Toby Hooper film I've seen. I don't know. But like, you can tell that, like, for this movie in particular, he was really interested in the ideas and the high concept and like what's happening in the scene to kind of explain and work around that idea, which is a part of why your boyfriend loves it. Kirby is high concept idea man to a fault.
Yes.
Like, character and everything else be damned, but like the space vampires, that's kind of weird. It's kind of an interesting concept. Our guy who's got a connection, like the fact that like it spreads like a plague. Like, it's, remember how like sometimes we talk about movies that have like all the movie in it. Like, this does not have all the movie in it, but it has all the movie ideas in it. Like, it's one of those kind of things. If it wasn't,
it's a lot of movie. It is a lot of movie. I mean, remember when we're in the, like, in Ireland with a curly red-headed masochist who needs to be manhandled in order to find the piece of information that they need next? Like, wow, that happened.
Right, and really that's terribly problematic, but also it's in Lifeforce, which is like that doesn't make it not problematic. That means that like
I mean, and half of Lifeforce is entertaining just for like, clearly you have to have the boobs and the you know, the vagina covered for a certain amount of time in order to maintain a certain rating. So it was just kind of like, is this a scene where they're gonna just show it, or is this a scene where a banister is gonna cover the tits?
Like,
because it would almost happen like shot to shot. It'd be like tits, no tits. Like, it was kind of like fascinating for that reason. I have to yell at my cat. I'll mute.
poor we have his cats trying to escape. Luckily my cat hasn't done that. We're going to lose Sarah for a second, but that's okay. I guess I'll wrap up my thought on this, which is that ultimately it is a little too dull for me to like want to go back regularly to it. There just isn't there's just a few too many scenes where people are talking and not enough is happening, but I will still want to go back to it at a certain point to watch it, I'm sure. And actually, Sarah will maybe talk about this when she gets back, but it's the kind of movie you want to see on the big screen. So like, I have to imagine at some point in my life, I will end up rewatching Lifeforce, and I hope it's on a big screen. That might even make the talky bits a little more easy to get through.
Yeah.
But so it's
I want to see
Lifeforce
on the big screen. That says something, right?
It does. It says something.
I don't even have too much else to say about it, though.
I gave my final thoughts, so.
Yeah, I think it's worth watching. I mean, if you don't like campy B sci-fi, I don't even know why you're watching this anyway, but I mean, you do you. You can skip it, but yeah, it's just kind of fun and interesting and weird, and it has a big budget and big ambitions.
I feel like I'm more likely to go back to The Incredible Man because it's just a little more. There's
the
just
Incredible
enough,
Melting Man.
The Incredible Melting Man. There's just enough more facets of that I want to go back to. But if Lifeforce shows up on the big screen somewhere, which somebody's got to be putting it on the big screen someday in the future, like that I would go to. So
yeah.